Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Who Knew in the Moment podcast. I'm excited. Today we have Bob Burg. Bob Burg is a famous author and has sold almost 2 million books or copies of his books in his career. And the series that's probably gained the most notoriety of Bob's is The Go Giver. And there are four different books that are included in that. And so Bob's accolades are vast. He was named Inc.'s or one of Inc.'s top 100 leadership speakers in the public keynote space. But what I would say is just knowing as much as I do about Bob, Bob's books help professionals not only in their professional walk but also in their personal life. And he's a very genuine guy, but one of his missions is to add value to others. And that's very evident in the books he's written and the things that or the topics that he speaks about. So, Bob, good to have you today.
Bill, it's great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, as everyone knows, the premise of the podcast is, in these small moments, we don't know exactly what they're going to allow us to pivot into or how they're going to radically change our lives. But inevitably, in hindsight, we can start connecting the dots. And so, Bob, I know you didn't start off as an author. I know as a kid you loved books and your parents were very supportive of that, but you started in the sales industry. So how did you get involved in sales and what was the attractiveness there for you?
Yeah, I started in sales after beginning as a broadcaster. I started out in radio doing sports, and then I was in TV. I was working for a very small ABC affiliate in the Midwestern United States. I was actually the late night news guy, and I really wasn't very good. I could read the news, that wasn't an issue, but I certainly wasn't a reporter. I certainly wasn't a journalist, and I also realized that wasn't going to be my calling. And so I started I like to say I graduated into sales.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. The challenge was that I had no sales background, no formal training, and the training where I was working was, we'll say, negligible at best, meaning
Yes.
it was non-existent. So it was pretty much just me going out there myself, doing the best I can. I had what the late great Jim Rohn would have said. I had the motivation, but I didn't have
Yes.
the information.
Yes.
so,
Yes.
so pretty much I was banging my head against the wall for about 4 months or so. And I went into a bookstore one day and I saw a couple of books on sales. Now, that doesn't sound like a big deal today, but back then, 40 years ago or so, that just wasn't as prevalent.
Right.
Not everybody knew about those kinds of resources. So I saw these books. One was by Zig Ziglar, one was by Tom Hopkins, two of the immortals of the business of the genre.
Yeah.
And I got their books, and I like to say I didn't read them, I devoured them. So I
Right.
would I would go home after work and I would just read and study and highlight and take notes and dog-ear pages and practice and everything. Well, within a few weeks, my sales began to go through the roof. And that was very encouraging to me, because what
Absolutely.
it says is if you have a methodology, a system, if you will, for doing something, there's really nothing within reason that you cannot accomplish. To this day, I would personally define a system as the process of predictably achieving a goal
Mm.
based on a logical and specific set of how to principles, the key being predictability. If you have learned that doing a certain thing, if you do A, you'll get the desired results of B. You know that by doing A, you'll get the desired results of B. You might have to work at it. Well, you will have to work at it, and there might be a lot of no's along the way, but you'll get that desired result. And so
Yeah.
again, that was very encouraging, and I enjoyed doing well in sales.
Yeah.
And I started to really make a study of it. And as you know, part of sales is studying personal development.
Yes.
And this was a whole new world to me. I had no idea this stuff existed. So I
Yeah.
mean, I just devoured Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People, Think and Grow
Right.
Rich by Napoleon Hill, The Magic of Thinking Big by Dr. David Schwartz, and Psycho Cybernetics by Maxwell Maltz. I mean, and it became just a love, a passion of mine. And eventually I worked my way up to sales manager of another company, and from there started teaching people how to do what was working for me. And as what did they used to say on the Seinfeld show? Yada, yada, yada. 30 years later, here we are talking.
Yeah, man. So I want to ask about something. What sent you to the bookstore that day? What was the reason that you had shown up? And tell me a little bit about that.
Well, I knew I needed something. I didn't know
Yeah.
what it was. I mean, I didn't expect, I thought maybe I'd look for books on business or something and that
Yeah.
would somehow help me. I wasn't really sure how. But, I've always tended to do that. When I wasn't exactly sure what to do, I try to head in a general direction of where I
Yes.
felt I needed to go. And all of a sudden things would happen and I'd find exactly what I needed.
I love that. I love that. Okay. So as you read through this and like you said, hey, it probably only took me 3 weeks and it was, I started seeing results. Was that a catalyst for you to start helping others, or was that more so, hey, that allowed me to have my success and then, as you mentioned, eventually get into a manager role?
Well, one of the things I loved about those two books is that, and pretty much all the great sales books I've read since then, because I mean, I've read hundreds and hundreds of books on selling.
Yeah.
The good ones will always tell you that the main goal of sales is to help the other person. I
Hmm.
mean, you think about it, what is selling by definition, right? Selling is discovering what the other person needs, wants, or desires and helping them to do it. When you speak, I know you're a very successful financial advisor. So when you talk to a client, you're not just giving them a bunch of things to do and to invest in, you're first asking questions. You're
Yes.
discovering what they're looking to accomplish. What's their level of comfort? What kind of legacy do they want to leave? What do they want from their lives that you can then match up through the products you're doing? So when
Yes.
we look at selling that way, it's always about giving, right? It's always about bringing value to another human being.
That's awesome. I think that's a key takeaway, and it was one of the things I have it here when I first read "Go Givers Sell More." Was the idea that everyone's in a form of sales, right? Is
Right.
some people maybe their direct paycheck or career
Hmm.
is in sales, but
Right.
everyone is in sales, whether
Sure.
that's selling yourself in a relationship, selling yourself, to your kiddos, your friends, your
Yep.
company. So why don't you talk a little bit about that and how, that's impacted your mindset and some of the things that you've written?
Well, I mean, I remember back in school, in high school, and I was a horrible student, by the way, back in school. I'm not proud of it. It's just
Yeah.
what it was. I didn't get why I needed to be there. I wanted to be out into the world and
Mm,
kind of felt like, what's this? And you think about something like history,
yeah.
okay? One of my favorite subjects now, right? But back in school, my attitude was like every other kid's attitude, not every other kid, but most of the kids' attitudes, which was, why do I care about something that happened 200 years ago or 50 years ago or 1,000 years ago? And, I remember my history teacher, and she was a lovely human being, a wonderful person. Um, but I think about it in retrospect when I started to understand what selling was and about how, as you say, we're all selling something. The first thing she should have sold us on was why history is important,
Bingo.
you know?
Yeah.
Um, but because without a proper premise, without all the logic in the world, doesn't matter. And
Right.
so I think that's what sales taught me is just as you said, we're all selling something to someone. And again, as long as we have that other person's best interest at heart, um, we're on the right track.
I enjoy it. Now, I want you to speak a little bit about this. You talked about how you went to a Zig Ziglar conference once, and
Mm,
he was offering, his tapes at the time, right? To your point today,
right.
we say, hey, you have a login and you pay a monthly membership, whatever it is.
Right.
But at the time, it was
Cassette
tapes.
tape albums.
Yeah, and the person that you went with said, "Gosh, I can't even afford that." And you said, "That's the reason." So would you share a little bit about that story? Because I think that's very impactful.
Well, he was sharing from on stage his tapes, and if you ever saw Zig speak, he'd walk the stage and he'd hold them up, and he was magnificent,
Yeah.
and so I went to get up as soon as it was over to go back and get the tapes. I was so broke at the time, I was trying to work my way up to being broke. Actually, I
Yeah.
wasn't even broke, I mean, and
Yeah.
so we're the other people who were there and that I had gone with, and just a couple of them said, well, Berg, what are you doing? I said, I'm going back there to get his tapes. And they said, well, you can't afford his tapes. We can't afford his tapes. None of us can afford his tapes. And I said, yeah, that's why I'm going back to get his tapes. So one day I'll be able to afford his tapes and anything else I want,
Yes.
you know. And again, I didn't listen to them. I devoured them. Right. And so, I think that's what it is. It's really what we're willing to invest in.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's the key word, right? It's an investment. It's not, when we're spending money on something that is going to benefit us in the future, it's not just, an instant gratification thing. It is an investment, right? It's a difference of how we view that. So
Exactly.
that's great. So as you're growing your sales career, at what point do you start thinking about, maybe I should do either keynote speaking and or starting to write a book?
Well, so the speaking came first,
Okay.
which for a lot of people it's the opposite, but for me the speaking came first. Um, as I was doing really well in sales, and I started studying other speakers, and because again the whole personal development thing, I just loved it. What happened was I had bought somebody else's set of tapes because I'm a voracious tape buyer and bookbinder and everything else, and so after this other person spoke, I bought his tapes, and at the end of his tapes he said something like, if you want to make some extra money selling my tapes by speaking, call our office and we'll show you how, or something like that. So I did. And they taught me how to, go out and speak at all these civic groups, clubs, organizations, speaking for free,
Yeah.
and doing, 20, 25, 30 minutes and then selling his tapes.
Wow.
And so I learned how to do it, and I became, from what they told me, I was their number one set, but I don't know how many people were doing it. It could have been like one of one, who knows?
Yeah.
But but anyway, I really enjoyed it. But after a couple of years, I realized I kind of wanted to do my own thing and so I started, doing what I had kind of learned, putting together some of my own unique materials, and started speaking. I joined the National Speakers Association so I could learn how to have a speaking business, because the speaking business is a business like anything else. You've got to know how to set it up, how to sell, how to market your speaking, how to, what have you.
Yeah.
I had, kind of built that up for a couple of years, and I was doing okay. I had money in, money out, money in, money. It's the beginning of any kind of business, and it was hard to,
Right.
get that going. But as I started to get a little bit more sustainably successful, I remember being at a National Speakers Association convention, and a couple of friends of mine. One was Randy Pennington, and he wasn't a friend of mine then. He's since become a great friend of mine. But Randy was one of the seasoned speakers, and there were some others, and we were sitting around and talking, and a couple of them said, "Burg, you should really write a book. It's going to help position yourself in the marketplace. You'll be able to be booked more, get higher fees, have more credibility, blah, blah, blah." And so I listened. So that's, so my first book, which was Endless Referrals,
Yeah.
Network Your Everyday Contacts into Sales, which was a how-to book. That was just totally utilitarian. I did that for the positioning in the marketplace. And it was a great move. I mean, it worked very well.
Yeah.
After that, my books became more because I felt I had something to say, some value to provide that I felt could be expressed in a book and reach more people. But yeah, that
Love it.
first one was totally because it would help me market my business.
I love it. So I want to rewind a little bit, just to a couple of things that you mentioned, which I want to highlight. So first was a gentleman that you went and listened to makes a comment at the end. Hey, if you'd like to sell my stuff, you can go speak for free, and we might, compensate you a little bit for selling our product. How did those original and beginning speeches or opportunities to speak go? And what were some of the greatest takeaways you had in the beginning of speaking?
Well, what was really good is that I did probably over that time about 100 free speeches.
Yep.
And so I got it down. You know what I mean? You start to know
Mm-hmm.
what works, what doesn't. You get more comfortable. You start to know. So it's interesting because we now have a team of certified go-giver speakers, people who
Okay.
pay us good money for the licensing rights to the materials. We teach them how to speak. We teach them how to market the whole thing. One of the things I talk to them about and suggest they do about 100 free speeches at
Yep.
every civic club, group, organization, anyone that will have you there to speak. because there's nothing like really getting comfortable with the material, with yourself. So you're not looking at notes, you're not having to think about it. You're able to really be with the audience, and your focus can be on the audience, not
Yes.
on yourself. And what am I going to say next? You start to learn what laugh lines work and which ones don't. You
Right.
start, you know what I'm saying? So those
Yeah.
free speeches are worth their weight in gold.
Yes. Well, so what I love about what you're talking about, Bob, is everyone sees where you're at now. To your point earlier, right? Hey, and 30 years later, here I am. Everyone can see the success you're at now, right? I mean, the quantity of books, the listings and accolades of your speaking. I mean, you got honored into a Hall of Fame of speakers. I mean,
Thank you.
you're great at it, but it started with being willing to do the free things, right? And I think
Sure.
for so many people, they want the end result with the beginning starting spot. And so what would be your, motivation to folks of if they're just wanting to get started in a new business or they're just wanting to get started in a new avenue, what would you give as encouragement saying, hey, having lived this life and done, the speaking and the book writing and getting to where I'm at, here's what I tell you to start.
Yeah. That's a wonderful question. And I think it's a little bit different for different people
Yep.
depending upon their business and what they're looking to do. So,
Yeah.
if let's say someone was going to get into financial services, be a financial advisor. Well, that doesn't mean that when they have a new client, they don't charge them a fee for it.
Right.
But what it might mean is they hang around with someone like you for a while and
Hmm.
ask, hey, can I get your coffee for you and listen in and kind of hang out with you sometimes and blah blah blah, and pick up your shirts and dry cleaning,
Yep.
and hang out with you more and drive you to some appointments and blah blah blah. So
Yeah.
but that doesn't, it certainly wouldn't be when you have a client who say, hey, it's my first time doing this, so I'm just gonna, no, I wouldn't go that way. But
Yep.
but it means that you make a determination on what you need to do in order to get the information that you need to be able to properly serve another person, and to the skills to be able to communicate that value.
Yes.
And again, I think you do it based on your own unique situation.
I agree. That's great. So as you're growing and the speaking is becoming more and more, and you have folks telling you, hey, you should really pursue this even more. And one avenue that'll help you is if you write a book. I'm curious, before you wrote the book, and things start growing even more, did you have an end goal of where you wanted to be? I mean, does Bob look back today as when he started and say, man, I reached my goal? Are you exceeding where you thought you'd be? Are you still, wanting to do more? Tell me a little bit about that and the mindset.
I don't think there was ever a point where I reached what I necessarily felt I had to reach.
Yeah.
But things changed in different areas in terms of
Hmm.
what I wanted to do. So, building a successful speaking practice, sure, but it was always around endless referrals. It was still, an outbound type of thing, as opposed to me getting calls. I could use what I had to position. I could get lots of referrals. That's what I taught, but it was always an outbound type of proactive building of the business, which again was fine for what it was. But I wanted to move to another point in my career. And The Go Giver, written by written with John David Mann, who
Yeah.
I credit John as, really he was the lead writer,
Yeah.
storyteller. And you probably heard me say that before, because it's just, he's magnificent. I'm a how-to guy, as you can tell, and John's a great storyteller. But after The Go Giver, which I felt was my way of kind of reaching a bigger audience in another
Mhm.
way. So it wasn't just the endless referrals part. It was
Yes.
more of a life message. It was a business and life message. But an interesting thing happened is the book got really big. Business started to come to me much more, and
Yeah.
that kind of put my business into a different category in a sense. But then I also wanted to take it to another level where we could have people who were, because people would ask me, have you ever thought of licensing your materials? And I
Yeah.
really hadn't. But the marketplace, if you listen to it, will kind of tell you what they're.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so I said, it's a good idea, because I can only, do so much. But I love teaching, of course, and I love the idea of having. So now we didn't set it up as something where if someone could afford it, they were in. Not at all. My business partner, Kathy Tagenel, and I are very we could say protective. I'd say paranoid about our brand. So
Okay.
for someone to become one of our speakers, they have to first be already very successful and having lived their life and conducted their business that way.
Yep.
There's, a program first they have to come to. It's a whole, a whole thing.
Yeah.
So, but we have a wonderful, amazing group of speakers, team of speakers. So that's another, now this newest thing I'm doing, because I had been, I'll at the time of this interview, I'm a couple weeks away from being 63. And while I've loved my business over the past 30 years, and really the honor I've had of speaking all over to some of the just greatest groups and people, and I never loved the traveling part. So
Ah,
over the
okay.
past,
Yeah.
so over the past few years, I've cut down on my travel significantly. And I was down now this year, I'd had 20 at the most. Now this past year, 2020, was going to be just 15 engagements outside, where I'd have to take a plane.
Yes.
I'll speak all day in Florida. That's fine. But I
Yeah.
mean, where I'd have to travel. Um, and of course, COVID wiped out that. And but what it said was, Berg, you're feeling kind of relieved that you don't have to travel. I
Yeah.
wasn't relieved about COVID, of course, that's a catastrophe. But the fact that I didn't have to get on a plane in 2020 was like the one thing for me during 2020 that was a real positive in terms of and I said, I'm just not doing it anymore. So
Yeah.
now I'm only speaking through when I speak at a conference or convention, only through you know, basically doing it right here,
Yeah.
doing it virtual.
Virtually. Yeah.
Um, so I'm not talking about interviews; those I'll always do. I speak on podcast. I mean, I'm interviewed all the time, but to actually speak at an event, they'll have to beam me in, Scotty. They'll have to,
Yep.
and so forth. So, but I also realized that would give me time to do something I really wanted to do, and that is create what we call the Go Giver Success Alliance
Mm.
that Kathy and I have just put together, where we can have it constantly, an entire community of people who live their lives and conduct business the Go Giver way,
Yeah.
where, I can teach and mentor and have questions and be a student as well as a teacher and
Right.
so forth. So that's my next. So so I'm not saying, well, we have to have this much this, or we had to have that many speakers, or I had to have that many bookings, or I kind of let that kind of happen. I know
Absolutely.
it's not politically correct. You're supposed to have a goal of, oh, I want to make X amount of money, and that's fine. Those are great.
Yep.
I haven't had to do that. I've been more. It's been more about the fun and the impact and the action that needs to be taken,
You
and that's just
bet.
how it's comfortable for me.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. That's perfect. So I want to dig in because you mentioned John David Mann, who after your first book, you guys co-authored and joined forces for the Go Giver series of books. How did you guys meet? What was the connection there, and how did the idea of writing together come about?
Yeah. So John was the editor-in-chief of a magazine I used to write for.
Okay.
So every month I'd submit an article, and John, as the editor, would correct it and edit it and send it back. And editors are very wise people. They're typically much better writers than we are, and they do good. But a lot of times they'll just take your best stuff and leave it on the editing room floor, and they're not really thinking context sometimes as much as space. And so it
Right.
can be kind of a back and forth type of thing sometimes. With John, it was totally different. He was so polite and kind,
Yeah.
and he'd send back a thing, and it would always be, hey, I moved this here, I took this out here, I placed this here, is this okay? And I'm never used to that. And
Right.
the running joke was every month I'd write him back saying, John, not only is it okay, you write my stuff better than I write my stuff. And so when I had the idea for the book based on the premise of endless referrals, that all things being equal, people will do business with and refer business to those people they know, like, and trust. And what is how does someone like that develop those relationships? How do they develop these relationships quickly and sustainably? And it was, well, they're givers, right? They're always focused on giving value to others. So coming up with the title, The Go Giver, pretty easy. But I also knew that, again, as a how-to author, that's different from
Right.
writing a parable. And
Yes.
I wanted this to be a parable. And so John was the only one I asked, the
Okay.
only one I wanted to be the lead writer and author. Now, at the time, even though he wasn't as known as he is now, because after the Go Giver, he became sort of the golden boy for like the agents and publishers when they had a celebrity or a big business person or a sports person who, needed a story, and John was the one they would hire to, do it. And,
Fascinating.
that's, yeah. But back then, very few people knew about this guy's genius and his brilliance. Well, fortunately, I was one of them who did.
Right, right.
So I had asked him to be the lead writer and the storyteller. And, and as he tells the story, he said to his, at the time, fiance, now his wife, Anna, he had said, I really don't have time to do this right now, but I mean, it's Bob. How can I just, not at least, acknowledge this and think about it and so forth. So the neat thing, they live in Western Massachusetts, but her mom lived in the Gulf Coast of Florida, where
Okay.
John and Anna still have a place now. But what they did is while they were down there, over there, they drove 4 hours to where I live on the East Coast of Florida. And we had about a 3-hour dinner discussing the book, the idea, what it would be about, what we do with it, what we wanted it to accomplish. He still wasn't totally persuaded. So it was about 3 weeks later when he called me and he said, I've spoken with my higher power, Anna. And he calls Anna his higher power. And, and he says, and we both think there might be something here. Let's do this. So it took us about 3 months to kind of put the book together, and then about a year and 25 rejections from different publishers.
Wow.
Before we found the perfect publishing partner, which was Portfolio, an imprint of Penguin Random House. So again, it goes to show, just keep kind of going through the nose, and you're eventually, if it's supposed to happen, you need to have it, do it without attachment to the results, but you take the correct action. And if it's supposed to happen, well, it's gonna.
That's phenomenal. So 25 different no's before you get to the yes. How during that did you guys stay motivated and, keep believing that, hey, this is, a good book, it's high quality, it needs to be out there?
Well, we believed in it. So we believed in the message.
Yep.
And we thought it would eventually find someone. But we also listened to the feedback. Now, of course, you got some that just said, we don't think another parable will work.
Yep.
Or, we just like it. Or, yeah, we love it, but it's just not for us. Or, all the different things. But there were some where it was, I think you need to have blah, 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 blah. And we listened, and we didn't just make the correction, but we then put it out to kind of our brain trust and said, okay, what do you think of that? So we made some changes. The book developed. We also put together a much better marketing plan over that year.
Okay.
And and so we took the areas that needed to be strengthened, and we did that, and
Absolutely. So the book gets, so the Go Giver gets published. Now, once again, when you release a new book and it's out there, where it goes from there is based on oftentimes your amount of effort. So what did you guys do to promote the book, and at what point did it click for you that you're like, this is a successful book? I mean, did it take time? Was it, hey, right off the bat it had great sales? Tell us a little bit about that.
I got to tell you, in my life, Phil, very few things have happened fast. I'm the type that's always had to work, extra hard for the things to, it's never been one of those instant success things with me.
Yep.
This was probably the first project I'd ever worked on that just right out of the gate happened.
Okay.
Now, of course, it still took, time it took that year and 25 rejections to happen. But once it got out there, it found an audience really quickly. Now, we had it set up pretty well, in which John and I both had good networks of people who knew us, liked us, trusted us, and they were willing to get behind the book. We sent it out to a lot of people who got behind the book. But really what it was the, and this is interesting, I think, that the first adopters, the early adopters of the book, were not the people who needed to read the book. Okay. It was the people who, because we got emails, tons of emails that said, this is how, first of all, from people who were very, very successful. Yeah. And they said, this is how I did it. And you guys have simply put a name and a methodology to it and the laws to it. And here's what they said. And this is what was so, to me, which made this happen. I've tried to tell others that this is how I've done it, and they haven't believed me. Why? because what do we see on TV and in the movies? Business people, people who make a lot of money, did it on the backs of others, or through stepping on people's toes, or through ripping people out, right?
Yeah.
Well, these people have been trying to say, no, that's not how, and people, probably believe them at an intellectual level, but
Right.
not on an emotional level. So they started buying the books for their teams. We were getting orders for tens, so, for hundreds, for thousands at times of books that went through organizations, okay, from leaders. Now, the second wave of adopters were the people who got this from those who who were their leaders, who were there.
Right.
And these are the people who, felt this is a message I needed. I didn't realize. And I think what it came down to is they wanted permission to be good people and
Yep.
still be successful.
Yes.
I mean, I
Yes.
think it came down to nothing more than a very simple message like that.
I love that. And I think the way that you guys wrote the story, and to your point, wanting it to be a parable, I think it helps people of all business levels and acumen, and just people in general,
Yeah.
be able to understand the concepts, because it's just examples, right? I mean, it's a parable, it's a story. So
Yeah, I mean, I think stories kind of connect on more of a heart-to-heart level.
yes.
And I know with me, and I've always enjoyed reading parables,
Yeah.
right? For that reason, you feel like the author's speaking to you. You're kind of emotionally connecting with the story and with the characters. You can see the mistakes you've made and some of the victories you've had. You can picture how you could be in that person's place.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's a really effective way of communicating a message.
Yes, that's fascinating. That's great. So, as the first Go Giver has success, then we traverse, and there's three more that you guys end up writing. And what were the catalysts for the next three books?
So the next one was Go Givers Sell More, which you had
Yeah.
talked about a bit earlier. And that's
Yep.
the only one of the four that's not a parable.
Yep.
That is a really, it's a guide, accompanying guide in a sense to the Go Giver.
Yes.
And that was because so many people asked us for like examples of how it, they wanted a deeper dive. Because
Mm-hmm.
with a parable, it's by nature, it's sort of a surface type of explanation.
Correct.
So they wanted a deeper dive. So what we did was two things with this. One, we went deeper into explaining the laws, the 5 laws. Okay. But we also shared stories of people who, after they read the book, applied that particular law and did really, really well. And we also had a lot of examples of people who, long before they ever read the book, were utilizing those principles. Because again, none of those laws are original to John and me. I mean, these have been around since time immemorial, right?
Right.
And so we just named them a certain way, explained them a certain way, put them together in a certain format, but they've always been. And so that was really what Go Givers Sell More was about. That was really an application guide to the Go Giver. But then, after that, people said, well, how would a leader take the principles of the Go Giver? And so we have the Go Giver leader. And then the last one was the Go Giver influencer, which is really a book on people skills.
Love it.
And, I truly believe that people skills are the differentiator between that person who has attained a reasonable level of success, a real legitimate level of success, and that person who attains what we call stratospheric success. People skills are the differentiator. When
Agreed.
you've got that, now you're 9 steps ahead of the game in a 10-step game.
Yep.
You're you much more easily develop the know, the like, the trust. People understand who you are, what you stand for, and it really makes life and makes business a lot easier.
That's amazing. That is amazing and spot on. I agree with you. It's sometimes it's a skill that you just need to read a book like that, right? That helps you learn a little bit more. And other times it's people that or organically just have that, maybe because of the way they're raised or people that they've been surrounded with. That's great. So one thing that you highlight, and I think it's interesting, and I always love talking about mentorship and being surrounded by others and learning from others. But you said you learned a golden nugget by a drive-by mentor, and that shifted your perspective. So talk a little bit about this drive-by mentor and how that came to be.
Well, this was a couple years after I started in sales. And again, I was doing pretty well and so forth. And I went to work for another company selling a very high ticket item. And I was in a slump, and I was in a bad slump. When you're in a slump, you can start to panic, and your
Hmm.
focus, rather than being on the other person, kind of is on yourself. Right. And
Right.
and I definitely fell into that. And I remember going back to the office one day after an appointment that turned out not to be a sale, and it was really my own doing. It was my own ineptness at the time and my own lack of the correct focus. And there was a guy there at the office. He wasn't in the sales department. I think he was in the engineering department. I didn't know him very well. Nice guy. I mean, but you didn't really. He didn't say much, and but he was one of these guys who, when he did say something, it was typically pretty profound. And I think he
Yes.
saw me sort of as Joe in the story that I then write about 20 years later or whatever it would be, and 25 years later. And as that up and coming salesperson, ambitious, aggressive, and really looking to succeed, but holding himself back. I think he saw that in me. And he said to me, Berg, he was a last name kind of guy. He said, Berg, can I give you some advice? And I said, yeah, please do. I need it. And he said, if you want to make a lot of money in sales, he said, don't have making money as your target. Your
Mm,
target, he said, is serving others. Now, when you hit the target, you'll get a reward, and that reward will come in the form of money. And you can do with that money whatever you choose. But never forget, he said, the money is simply the reward for hitting the target. It
love
ain't the
that.
target itself. Your target is serving others. And that's really when it hit me that great salesmanship was never about the salesperson. Right?
Bingo.
Great salesmanship is never about the product or the service, as important as those are. Great salesmanship is about the other person. It's about touching the lives of those you serve. It's how that other person's life becomes better
Yeah.
just as a result of having you in it. And when you
That
start from that premise, now sales takes on a whole different meaning.
that is so profound. I absolutely love that because it is. It's others focused, right? When it becomes about us, that's
Yeah.
when things don't go as well. So
Yeah. I like to say be internally motivated, but externally focused.
yes, that's great. What a golden nugget. Listen to that 9 times, write it on your walls, get it tattooed, whatever you need to do. But remember
Thank you.
that. That's good. So when we talk about mentorship, right, you've had a lot of different people in your life that have, given you guidance, given you nuggets or thoughts of things. But one of the things you like to talk about is what's the best way to find a mentor?
Well, I mean, I think there's lots of places you can find them. They can be people people in your community, people in your community know who they can introduce you to. It could be someone you meet online. I think the biggest thing more than finding them, although, you want to find someone who obviously has either been successful in your field or just has been successful in certain ways who you'd like to learn from. Someone with, who has similar values and so forth. But I think the
Yeah.
big thing is how you approach them,
Yeah.
because most people who you want to have mentor you, lots of people want to have them mentor them, and they only have a limited amount of time to be able to to do that. So I think that what a lot of people do is they'll approach this person, uh, and they'll say something like, hey, would you be my mentor? And what happens, I think, with most of these people who are asked is, it comes across first in a way that's a bit entitled. I mean, it's almost like saying, hey, will you share 30 years of your experience with me, even though you don't know me from a hole in the wall, right?
Yep.
And so, in it, eh, so I think that when you approach someone like that in such a way that you say, if you're either too busy to do this or just don't have the inclination, I absolutely totally understand. I'm wondering if I could possibly ask you one or two very specific questions.
Yes.
Now, when you do that, you've done a few things. One is you've honored the process. You have not come across as though you're entitled or they owe you. You're letting them know that you understand this is a big ask and that they're busy people. You're also giving them the out or back door by saying, I'll totally, understand.
Yeah.
But you're also not just asking them for something very general, like I want to pick your brain, I want to waste 2 hours of your time. You're saying, if I could ask you one or two very specific questions. And this tells the person that you're serious,
Yep.
that you have an agenda. And in this context, when I say agenda, I mean that in a good way.
Right,
You
right,
know
right.
exactly what you want to, right? It's not a
Yeah.
hidden agenda. You let them know your agenda, one or two very specific questions. And so, then, and most people will say, sure, of course, not everybody, but not everybody has to,
Yep.
but people will. And of course, make sure you research them sufficiently so you don't ask them anything that you could know the answer to without, before asking, because obviously that would be counterproductive. You want to make sure you don't take up much of their time. You express your gratitude and let them know how much you appreciate their help, and you'll keep in touch if that's okay, and let them know of your progress, which they'll welcome you to do. And I would say that, once you get off the phone, you send a personalized, handwritten note of thanks, just a brief one saying, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule. Your advice was just so priceless, and I look forward to applying it. And, I'll keep in touch and let you know, whatever. Hand stamp, handwritten, boom, send it. I'd also, do something like, make a small, doesn't have to be anything big, but make a small donation to their local charity of choice, which you can easily, again, find out just by researching them online, or at most
Right.
calling their admin and asking. And make a small donation in their name. They'll be notified of that. And you're not doing it to kiss up or anything, but just, again, to honor the process
Yep.
and communicate how much you appreciate them. Now, when you call back or email or whatever it happens to be, however it's been in a few weeks, to let them know how, what's happening. You might have another question, or you might be in a, get into a conversation. And if a mentor protege relationship is supposed to ensue over time, it will, but it's a relationship. It
Yep.
doesn't just happen overnight. And it might be that that's the only time you'll speak with that person. And it might be somebody else you speak about with something else, or someone who maybe for a couple of months. And eventually you might find that one, Tuesdays with Maury type of mentor who you're always, talk.
Yes.
I don't know. You can't be attached to the result. You just got to do the, and that's really, I think, what it comes down to. Don't be too attached to have that one mentor in that one area forever. No, just whatever's going to happen is going to happen.
I think that's phenomenal. And the thing I like that you just shared is, in the mentor mentee relationship, oftentimes the mentee doesn't provide as much value in regards to a knowledge exchange. But if you're doing some of those things, you can still add value back, right? So if you're making a small donation or
Sure,
a
sure.
donation, they'll make them feel good. Handwritten letter, people always appreciate that their time was valuable,
Exactly.
and a thank you. So that's great. That is great. Well, then last pointed question I have for you, Bob. Um, I always think there's a concept that's been very impactful in my life, and it's this idea of blissful dissatisfaction. Okay. And so as I explain it, certain people hit their goal and then they plateau because they hit the goal and they don't want to ever exceed it. Then you kind of have the other end of the spectrum of a person who says, I hit my goal, now what's next? And they're constantly working on what's next. And so they never actually enjoy the process, or they don't take time to look back and realize all the amazing things they've accomplished.
Mhm.
How in your career and in your life have you been able to balance that? Because you've obviously exceeded expectations and done wildly amazing things in a lot of different areas, but actually, taking time to reflect on that.
Well, first of all, I've exceeded expectations in certain areas, and I've failed miserably in certain areas. So, it's not like everything's been a success, believe me. And
Yeah.
so, yeah. And but going back to what you had said about I think you called it blissful dissatisfaction.
Yes.
I like that. I mean,
Yeah.
accomplish certain goals and you feel a certain way, you stay in the present, you enjoy what you do, you feel grateful, you're appreciative, but there's also, there's also other things you want to do. And so I think those are the happiest people. They're always learning something new, they're heading to some, but they also stay in the present in order to enjoy what they're doing at the time.
Yes, I love it. Well, Bob, it has been an absolute joy having you on today. I appreciate your wisdom, sharing your story. I mean, it's amazing to look at some of those seemingly small moments, right? The gentleman that pulls you aside and, makes a comment after a tough day in sales, the ability to listen to Zig Ziglar and then actually apply it, the opportunity to, go through 25 people telling you no, but you say, well, we're going to go on to 26, and where that's led you. I appreciate you sharing, just a lot of great insights and the amazing things that you've done. And I hope for everyone that's listening, we'll include a link in the bottom where you can find Bob's books. They're very easy to find. They're all over, but would definitely encourage seeking those out. And as he continues to release more, that's virtual, interacting and connecting with those as well.